The Denver Broncos believed in some mile-high magic in Sunday's 11-10 victory against the San Francisco 49ers. The Broncos improved to 2-1 on the season. The offense finds vintage Russell Wilson in the fourth quarter, but the defense was the story of the game alongside special teams. We break down all the action in today's Locked On Broncos post-game report.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day. Free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, or whether you watch us on YouTube. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button if you have not done so already, so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, and more from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. The Denver Broncos improved to 2-1 on the season after a big-time victory against the San Francisco 49ers, 11-10 in a wild scoregami-type game here. A lot of adversity, a lot of resiliency in this game by the Denver Broncos, but more importantly, a win is a win, and we're breaking it all down on today's episode of the show. Sayre, my friend, some mile-high magic in the fourth quarter for them Denver Broncos.
How about that, Cody? Only the second time in NFL history, according to the NBC broadcast, that a game has ended with a final score of 11-10. So kind of crazy. Like you said, a little scoregami out there. I don't know if anybody quite had Jimmy Garoppolo pulling a Dan Orlovsky on their bingo card for this game. It kind of sounded more like, the return of Michael Jordan to the 95 Bulls based on what I was hearing. But man, it was fun is not necessarily the right word until the end. Like you mentioned, that mile-high magic. And man, I think finally in that late fourth quarter, we finally got our let's ride moment. It was good. It was a good finish to the game, of course, but man, lots to be unpacked from this one for sure.
I mean, while we were waiting for Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett to come to the podium, we were talking George Stoia, Eric DeLalla, and we said that was like the most not stressful, but that was a tough 3 quarters of football to watch offensively. Then the fourth quarter, I mean, that was one of the funnest endings to a game that I think Broncos country has seen in quite some time, Sayre. It's been many years, but as you mentioned, in that fourth quarter, we saw a little bit of vintage Russell Wilson here, and he led an impressive final offensive series here for the Broncos that led to a scoring drive. Now, one of the narratives that we saw all week long, how come Russ isn't using his legs? How come he's not doing extra things there? Well, in that fourth quarter, I mean, I tell you what, for a guy who was sacked 4 times and had a lot of pressure and a lot of contact, a lot of QB hits against him on the evening, he's a guy that didn't shy away from stepping up and using his legs in a big-time moment. And I'd say probably one of the bigger plays of the game here, Sayre, for the Broncos offensive side of the ball, as many times as the defense got them back the ball, and special teams did a great job. We'll touch on that a little bit later. Russell Wilson rolls out on a 3rd and 10 play and finds Kendall Hinton wide open for a 27-yard gain. That was a big momentum shifter for this Broncos team. But then another situation, 3rd and 6. The Broncos really struggled, and they were backwards a lot of the times on the evening. But on 3rd and 6, Russell Wilson, for some reason, decided to take things into his own hands and use his own legs for a 12-yard rush on 3rd and 6 to move the chains. And then you would have Courtland Sutton catching a back shoulder throw for 19 yards. Melvin Gordon would punch it in from 1 yard out to give the Broncos an 11-10 victory over the 49ers. I mean, they tried to go for a 2-point conversion to make it 13-10. Unfortunately, they couldn't convert it. But, man, that put everything in the defense's hands. But I wanted to mention that final drive specifically, Sayre. I know we'll talk about the defense here in a little bit, but that was some vintage Russell Wilson taking over in the fourth quarter and now moving to an 18-4 all-time career record against the San Francisco 49ers. But now, the Broncos, after this win, they're tied for first in the AFC West at 2-1.
Well, if you're a Broncos fan, it doesn't get much better than this past Sunday, does it, Cody? I mean, the Chiefs lose, the Chargers lose, the Raiders lose, the Broncos cap off Sunday night with a victory. So all things considered, a pretty huge dub for Broncos country. And like you mentioned, sitting tied atop the AFC West, right in the mix there with the Miami Dolphins of all teams at the top of the AFC in general. So lot of good things happening, Cody, but I wanted to point out too, that sequence that you mentioned, all those different plays by Russell Wilson. There was one play early on in that sequence that you mentioned. Russell Wilson was sacked 4 times, right? So it was the 5th time that he wasn't sacked on a first down play where Nick Bosa got him around the ankles and Russ kind of held himself up by his hand, right? He got out of that play and it was all of a sudden 2nd and 10 and no harm done, no sack. And I mean, it was just like you said, vintage Russell Wilson. It was that escapability that we come to, man, a lot of times hate Russell Wilson for, but now we love it, seeing him in orange and blue. And I think that was exactly what Broncos country needed to see, a little glimmer of hope for the future of the offense. And Russell Wilson, as always, after the game, very optimistic, speaking about, we have great things yet to come, like things are going to start working out for the offense and all that different type of stuff. So hopefully eventually they're able to back up that, those words with a lot of action on the field and a lot of good things on the field that we'll see from the offense. But man, it was, I don't think I've ever seen an 11-10 game. Like you said, stressful, I think is the way that I would put it. It kind of felt the same way against Houston, kind of felt the same way against Seattle. It's just stressful because there's that tension between like, what's our expectation of what a Russell Wilson offense should be able to be doing on a weekly basis compared to what they're out there doing, which actually looks more like my Spencer Petras-led Iowa Hawkeyes offense. So, Cody, I'm ready for this thing to just take off and really get riding every single week here. But for now, we'll take the 2-1 record.
And there's a lot of things with this Broncos offense. I mean, that was a great fourth quarter drive. There's a lot of concerns here, but this is a post-game victory podcast, and so we'll address that on the next episode of Locked On Broncos. The concerns that we have with Denver offensively, there's a lot that we got to break down on that. But Broncos country, coming up here in just a moment, we're going to highlight one of the bigger performances so far of the season against a very, very good San Francisco 49ers team. The Broncos offense able to overcome a very good defensive performance by the 49ers, but it was the Broncos defense that deserves a lot of praise on today's episode of the Post Game Report. We'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, now let me tell you about a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. And it can be tough to train your brain to stay in problem-solving mode when faced with a challenge in life. And when you learn to find your own solutions, there's no better feeling. And a therapist can help you become a better problem solver, making it easier for you to accomplish your goals, no matter how big or how small. And I've been utilizing BetterHelp every single day. I check in with my therapist once a week, and we go through some problem-solving techniques that I can use to reduce stress, to reduce anxiety, and everything else that I have in my daily life outside of covering football. And if you're thinking of giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is a great option. It's convenient, accessible, affordable, and entirely online. You can get matched with a therapist after filling out a brief survey, and you can switch therapists anytime if it's not the right fit for you. So when you want to be a better problem solver, therapy can get you there. Visit BetterHelp.com/NFL today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp. BetterHelp.com/NFL. The Denver Broncos defense turned in an impressive performance on Sunday in primetime action against Jimmy Garoppolo, Deebo Samuel, and George Kittle. Thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts in audio format, or whether you're watching us on YouTube. We appreciate you so much. Sayre, lost amongst the whole talks about some of the concerns amongst the Broncos offense and how they took a while to get things going. I tell you what, the defense heading into this matchup has been as advertised and very, very good. Obviously, we saw the good news. Patrick Surtain was active in this game, and he was targeted 6 times, allowed 0 receptions in this game, and in particular was a big guy that covered Brandon Ayuk throughout this game a little bit because he was having success early on the other side, and Patrick Surtain came in and kind of put the clamps on him a little bit there. But, Sayre, this might be one of the most resilient, I would say, strong performances. I feel like this might have been one of the best defensive performances the Broncos have put on against a very good opponent. It's in the last 6-7 years. I mean, it's got to be up there in the top 3, in my opinion. I don't know how you feel about it, but Denver's defense, they buckled down, and there were so many opportunities where San Francisco started at midfield due to the Broncos, having an issue, turning the ball over, getting sacked, or long field positions, and then bam, the defense coming up big once again.
And it was great to see, too, because, first of all, Justin Simmons hasn't been playing, right? So you're missing arguably your best player on that side of the ball and one of the key communicators on the back end of the defense. So to me, Cody, what's really great about this Denver defense right now, and what was really great about that 2015 unit as well, is that every single game, it's like everybody on that unit is making plays. It doesn't matter if they're in the starting lineup. It doesn't matter if they're, the guys that kind of rotate in. Everybody is out there pulling their weight, making plays. And what's really, really awesome to see right now, all the guys in perfect position. I think that is exactly why they won this game in the end, because the Broncos defenders were in the perfect position on so many different plays. You think about the play where Kareem Jackson breaks up the pass and all of a sudden Jonas Griffin is there to catch it. That interception, the key interception to get the Broncos the ball back with just over 2 minutes remaining in the game. To me, Cody, that was exhibit A of these defenders constantly being in the right place at the right time, and that's not happening by accident. It's happening on purpose. The K'Wan Williams pass breakup, I mean, my goodness, right place at the exact right time, making a play on the ball. And Ronald Darby, the screen that the 49ers tried to throw on third down to Deebo Samuel, that Ronald Darby was right there to break it up if Bradley Chubb didn't get his hand up and deflect it away anyway. What I'm saying here is that the defenders are in the right place at the right time. You got to tip your cap to defensive coordinator Ejiro Evero for calling an amazing game. I mean, everybody saw the Sunday Night Football panel. Every analyst, everybody on TV, everybody that gets paid to analyze the games, they bought into the, let's bag on Nathaniel Hackett. Let's bag on Russell Wilson. What they forgot to do is watch the tape of the Denver Broncos defense, which at this point has to be arguably the best in the NFL through the first 3 games of the season. They have been absolutely lights out, creating turnovers, getting sacks, right place at the right time. The defense looks really good.
They really did. And as you mentioned, big plays at the right time. I mean, that fourth quarter, that final drive, right? Because the Broncos, after they got the lead, they had to run a couple of plays. The 49ers had 3 timeouts plus the 2-minute warning. So Denver ran 3 run plays, had to punt the ball away, and the defense came up big. Bradley Chubb off the right side, coming up with a huge sack on Jimmy Garoppolo, backing them up to the 2-yard line. And then all of a sudden, the next play, pressure coming all around. Jimmy Garoppolo dumps it off to Jeff Wilson Jr. P.J. Locke comes from behind, dislodges the ball, and Kareem Jackson picks up. I mean, we're talking about mile-high magic here. That was one of the key catalysts there, and obviously that helped secure the Broncos' victory. But I tell you what, it was the accumulation of everything that set things up there. And we talk about just forced turnovers. I mean, Denver, they were able to sack Jimmy Garoppolo 4 times. One of them kind of coming as just Jimmy Garoppolo doing the whole Dan Orlovsky stepping out of the back of the end zone for a safety, credited there to Mike Purcell. But Bradley Chubb coming up with a sack, Randy Gregory coming up with a sack, and you had Josey Jewell coming up with a sack in this game. But Jimmy Garoppolo also fumbled a snap early on in this game that was recovered by Josey Jewell in his return. And I would say, the Broncos defense definitely missed him. I mean, he was a leading tackler, 9 tackles, 2 quarterback hits, 2 tackles for a loss behind the line of scrimmage, a fumble recovery, and a sack. It was a big-time game for the Outlaw and the Broncos defense. But you know what? I also want to pinpoint something else here about this Broncos defense. They eliminated what we talked about in our keys to the game, right? Eliminating the big-time play. Now, Deebo Samuel here in this game, Sayre, he was targeted 8 times. He had 5 catches, 73 yards. But his biggest play of the day came early on in the game where he lined up as a running back out of the backfield, which isolated him in a one-on-one matchup with Josey Jewell, which, I mean, based on the Broncos scheme, the 49ers did a really good job trying to get that chess piece in that position there, and he had a 32-yard catch and run. But as a rusher, get this, Deebo Samuel had 5 rushing attempts for 6 yards, 1.2 total yards per carry for him, and the Broncos really buckled down, holding the 49ers to 88 yards rushing. And coming into this game through 2 weeks, the 49ers were the 4th-ranked rushing offense, averaging 182.4 yards per yards per game on the ground as a rushing unit. Denver came up big when they needed it. And you know what also stood out to me, Sayre? 3rd down. It was huge for the Broncos defense, holding the 49ers to 1 of 10 on 3rd down. And there were various times where the 49ers had a 3rd and short, 3rd and 1, 3rd and 3, and they simply couldn't convert. Their only conversion came late in the 4th quarter.
And that makes the time of possession battle in this game all the more surprising, doesn't it? When you hear those kind of stats, how often the Broncos were getting the ball back, getting it away from the 49ers. I mean, it was a 10-minute difference. It was like 35 minutes of time of possession for the Broncos compared to just under 25 for the 49ers. So to me, Cody, it's just an all-around performance. You're creating turnovers. You're getting off the field on 3rd down. You're doing everything right. It was just awesome to see, and especially in prime time when you got a lot of people kind of going against you, right? I mean, it was those big plays that sealed the deal in the end, but it was really a cumulative over the course of 4 quarters after that initial touchdown drive by the 49ers, where everybody on Twitter is saying, oh, that was way too easy. That just looked way too easy. Well, the Broncos kind of put the clamps on after that point, and they're like, all right, well, nothing is going to be easy from here on out. And that's one of the great things about Ejiro Evero so far, right? He's been able to make those adjustments after, you'd love to see a shutout every week. I mean, who wouldn't want to see that from their defense? But man, just the pressure is coming from all angles. The Broncos are so efficient on a play-to-play basis defensively. You almost feel like something's percolating there where a defensive score is about to happen for this team. So I feel it, Cody. I feel it in the air, and we're going to see it soon. But, man, the defense is the star of the show right now for the Broncos. No coincidence that every single one of the defenders, according to Nathaniel Hackett, got a game ball after this one.
Oh, man, a resilient effort defensively. And there was that one, especially on the safety, where Mike Purcell forced Jimmy Garoppolo to kind of step backwards and go out of the end zone for a safety. I mean, on that play, he threw what would have been a pick six to Bradley Chubb as well. So I think everyone was hoping like, oh, gosh, hey, don't take the safety, take the touchdown, because it would have helped the Broncos out so much in this game when you go back and you look at it. And there's so many guys that deserve a lot of credit. Baron Browning also went down with a knee injury. Heard him speak in the locker room briefly after the game. It seems like he's going to be okay. I think he's going to get some testing, and we'll await further results. But, I mean, he's able to walk off the field under his own power. The story, though, that we did not get any clarity on is DJ Jones left the game with a head injury and did not return. So we'll wonder what his status is. But Broncos stepped up in a big-time way on the defensive side of the ball. But, we also got to factor in, I want to give a special shout-out to defensive players on special teams. Alex Singleton finally getting some more run on special teams with the return of Josey on defense. I tell you what, he, Justin Sternad, Aaron Patrick, those guys went downfield on punts and kickoffs, and they covered and tackled really well. The Broncos special teams unit gets an A+ in this game, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Broncos defensive MVPs and also why special teams deserves a little bit of love here on Locked On Broncos coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, we have a Colorado sports podcast for every single Colorado sports fan here on the Locked On Podcast Network. You're listening to Locked On Broncos right now, but we also have a show. If you're an Avalanche fan, the Locked On Avalanche podcast is up and running with Kyle Sullivan and Chris Maselli. The Locked On Rockies podcast will have you covered as the Rockies conclude their season, and with the Denver Nuggets season starting up, especially with Media Week this week, make sure you check out Adam Mares and Matt Moore of the Locked On Nuggets podcast. Some MVPs on the Broncos defense and special teams side of the ball deserve to be acknowledged after the Broncos' 11-10 primetime victory over the San Francisco 49ers, finding some mile-high magic in the fourth quarter. Thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in to the Locked On Broncos post-game report here, making us your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you so much. Sayre, we've talked a lot about the offense. We've talked about the defense a little bit here, but I have to give a special shout out to the Broncos special team side, right? Which oftentimes is another form of defense. In some aspects, it can be a form of offense for them, but it was more so the defensive benefactor here today. Now, we talked about the Broncos. Their defense, they forced the 49ers to punt 7 times. The 49ers defense forced the Broncos to punt a total of 10 times in this game. That is definitely concerning when you look at the Broncos offense. But in a week where Dwayne Stukes, Broncos special teams coordinator, kind of called Corliss Waitman out on his net yards, net average, and that he needed to do a better job, 10 punts for a total of 476 yards, averaging 47.6 yards per punt, and also a 43.6 net average. That was very efficient. But here's the thing. 6 of those 10 punts were downed inside the 20-yard line, helping the Broncos have some good advantage. And not to mention, a couple of those. One came on the 3. One was on the 1-yard line with a big-time play by Mike Boone. Corliss Waitman deserves an absolute round of applause, as well as the coverage units as well that stepped up without Tyree Cleveland. This is a defensive special teams MVP here for Corliss Waitman. And then we have some other guys we're going to talk about.
We do, yes. Well, you're right. Corliss Waitman definitely deserving of that special teams MVP on the night. I mean, when we talk about how great of a defensive performance it was for the Denver Broncos, I mean, the safety on Jimmy Garoppolo, is that possible without a punt by Corliss Waitman and a great play by, I believe it was Mike Boone on that particular sequence there. So Mike Boone out there making plays on special teams as well, downing the ball inside the 2, basically. It was really close to the 1. So to me, Cody, it was the biggest difference maker in this game for the Broncos. When you're struggling like that offensively, because the 49ers gave the ball to Denver at midfield multiple times. I mean, the Broncos had opportunities offensively to cash in, And then all of a sudden you're relying on Corliss Waitman to pin the 49ers deep and play that field position game. It ended up being that field position game was the difference in the game, because 2 points the other way and the Broncos lose 10-9. So definitely Corliss Waitman, a huge game in this game for the Denver Broncos. But you're right, he wasn't the only special teams player to make plays. You mentioned guys like Aaron Patrick and guys like Alex Singleton going and making plays on coverage. I will say Brandon Mcmanus, he had the missed field goal in this game, but he also came through pretty clutch with his directional kickoffs as well. I think that needs to be mentioned when we're talking about great things on special teams, right? He was able to pin the 49ers deep as well by kicking the ball towards the sideline, and the coverage unit just did such a great job. The 49ers really didn't have an answer for it. So the Broncos made sure they took advantage schematically on special teams this week, which was kind of fun to watch. I know that the missed field goal is going to leave a bitter taste in people's mouths, but like you said, on the whole, special teams, A+ in this game.
Well, let's get to some of the Broncos pass rushers. And I tell you what, Sayre, we talked about it last week after the Broncos win against the Texans. Through 2 games, they forced 5 fumbles, whereas they had, I believe it was 5 or 6 total forced fumbles in 17 games all of 2021. Well, Denver, they had several forced fumbles on the evening here against the San Francisco 49ers. And I tell you what, just when we look at the pass rushers and guys who've been impact players, that sack by Bradley Chubb in the fourth quarter was huge. And Chubb, once again, proving that in clutch moments, and it wasn't just in that fourth quarter, it was also on the safety where he had the pick 6. I mean, there's things that Bradley Chubb is doing. He's playing at an unbelievably high level of football right now. And Randy Gregory, as he continues to get into better game shape, man, he flashes off the screen when you watch him. High motor, physical, hard hitting, and he had a sack as well on Jimmy G. We mentioned Josey Jewell had a sack, and Mike Purcell with the forced safety. Consider that being a sack. That performance was great. We talked about Patrick Surtain early on in the game. Zero catches allowed on 6 targets on the evening. I tell you what, the defense is so much better when Patrick Surtain is out there on the field, and he had a couple of amazing pass breakups. It was an unbelievable performance. There were also some other guys as well. We talked about the return of the outlaw, Josey Jewell. What were your thoughts on his performance?
Cody, you mentioned it earlier with his stats that he posted in this game. It was kind of like he was trying to make up for lost time, right? For missing those first couple of games. He's out there just filling up the stat sheet with 9 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a sack, a fumble recovery. I don't know if he was bringing out the Gatorade to the offense when they needed a breather, although they had plenty of breathers in this game. But Josey Jewell was all over the field doing everything, and you love to see that. You also love to see it. We kind of mentioned this in the pregame shows and the things leading up. A lot of the former 49ers players on this Denver Broncos roster coming up huge in this game, like Jonas Griffin. I forgot that he was even a 49er. The Broncos traded for him last year, but man, he came up with that big interception. And he honestly, he would have had an interception earlier in the game if not for a tipped ball at the line of scrimmage. I can't remember which defensive lineman tipped it, but Jonas Griffin was in the background, like raising his fists in the air. He was all upset because he knew he was in position on George Kittle to make an interception. So he had a great game. Cody, Mike Purcell had a great game as well. And when he is able to go out there and really just win at the line of scrimmage, you talked about it, 88 yards for the 49ers rushing attack. Mike Purcell was a big reason why the Broncos won this game. And obviously him being a former 49ers player, K'Wan Williams as well, making the big pass breakup late. So former 49ers all over the place.
That is a storyline that I honestly didn't pay too much attention to. I'm glad you brought that up because I forgot Purcell played for the 49ers. I forgot Jonas Griffin at one point played for the 49ers. K'Wan Williams had that pass breakup on Deebo Samuel on that third down that you alluded to earlier in the game. That was huge. Man, just big moments here by this Broncos team. A lot of stuff that needs to be fixed on the offensive side of the ball, and that'll be the focus of tomorrow's episode. Lockdown Broncos here in your favorite audio podcasting platforms or YouTube. When should people be concerned about the Broncos offense if they're not already concerned as is, and what can they do to fix some of their issues? We'll break that down on tomorrow's brand new Lockdown Broncos, but thank you so much for tuning in to the post-game report. Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we have you covered every single day, all year long. Your team, every day.